You may not be an expert in depth of field, but you can be a genius. Let's skip the complicated equation for another time.
What is depth of field?
Depth of field is the acceptable range of focus throughout the picture. If we have a picture that has great depth of field or deep depth of field, there's lots of things in focus. If we have a picture that has narrow depth of field or shallow depth of field, there's only a little bit of focus, and the rest is blurry. To learn it best, let's go to the secret lab.
Why did the photographer quit his career?
I don't know.
He couldn't remain focused. How can I change my depth of field?
There are 5 different ways that we can change our depth of field. The first one is the aperture of the lens. As the lens opens or shuts, it makes things come in and out of focus. We can have more in focus as the lens closes down, like f16, f22. A lot of things will be in focus in our picture. If we open up our lens to like f2, f4, lots of things will be out of focus with just a little bit sharp in our picture. Note, it's very important to know that with aperture, it's the only factor that will affect your exposure or the brightness of your picture. So the other factors will not change the brightness or darkness of your picture. Tip number 2, the focal length of the lens. As the lens gets longer, the background will get blurrier. If you want to have a blurry background, zoom in your camera and it will help to blur the background. You can see this actually in your camera lens. As you're zooming in and out, you can see the difference. Now, if you want to have lots of things in focus, go ahead and use a wide angle lens. Zoom out a lot, and that'll make lots of things sharp in your picture. Number 3, the distance between you and the camera. As the camera gets closer to you, there'll be a narrower depth of field between you and the subject. Now, if you move the camera back, there'll actually be more in focus for the distance that's further away. We see this in macro photography. If you take a picture of a ring or a flower, and you get really, really close, there's not going to be much in focus because it's just a fraction of an inch of sharpness. But if you stand back a ways and you shoot a landscape photography, you can have 50, 60, hundreds of feet that are in focus because the distance is much further. Number 4, the focal plane. As I adjust my focusing of the lens back and forth, the one part that will be sharpest is what it's set to. If my camera is set to 10 feet, then 9 feet and 11 feet will not be as sharp as 10 feet because that's where I've set the camera. Now, as I start to change the focusing, I can decide to change and focus on the close object, or the further object, or an object in between. So I can blur the background more if I focus closer to the camera. If I focus further away, it will change the amount of depth of field in the subject. Now, we have something called a third in front and 2/3 to the back. So when we have depth of field, it's not in the middle. It's a third in front, 2/3 in the back. Which means, with focusing, we don't want to focus on the front row of a group, or to the back row of a group, or to the middle row of the group. We want to focus actually a third into the picture. So if we have lots of things in focus, we'll focus setting the focal plane at a third of the group, or a third of the landscape scene, and the rest will then become focused. A prime example I see ruined all the time, is when students will photograph the sun or the clouds. They focus on the clouds and the sun. That is so far away, they don't need to do that. Then the foreground is blurry. We should instead focus maybe 30, 40 feet away, and this allows everything to be much sharper. This is called hyperfocal focusing. Number 5, the angle of the camera. As the camera back, so is the depth of field distance. As I tilt the camera, the depth of field will also change. So if I focus on my subject like this, the focusing will be sharp throughout here. If I focus at an angle and I tilt the camera, his head will be sharp, but his body will be blurrier because it's focused on the same focal plane. It matches the back of the camera. All the way sharp, shoot it eye level, shoot it at an angle, and now I can have his face be focused, but the rest of him will get blurry.
Why did the photographer dig a hole in his garden?
I don't know.
He wanted to see depth of field.
That's good, that's good. Remember, you may not be a photography expert, but you can be a genius.